Clutter doesn't just take up space on our shelves, it creeps into our minds, our daily routines, and, slowly, our lives. Studies show that the average person spends around 55 minutes a day searching for misplaced items. That's more than 12 days a year lost to clutter. And in households where disorganization and clutter pile up, stress levels rise significantly. But statistics don't even scratch the surface of what it feels like to live in a cluttered environment. I was one of those people, buried under layers of things I couldn't let go of, things that filled my home and emptied my peace. My journey to a simpler, more organized life was more than just a battle against a mess. It was a fight for my sanity, one I didn't know I needed to win until I was on the edge. It started slowly. A few things left out here and there, an extra box from a purchase that I forgot to throw away, books piling up on the coffee table, and kitchen drawers filled with random things I thought I might need someday. And that someday? It never came. Before I knew it, my space was no longer my sanctuary. It was an overcrowded chaos that reflected the storm in my mind. Every time I looked around, I was reminded of all the things I hadn't done, hadn't cleaned, hadn't thrown away, hadn't organized. It was like a weight pressing down on me, one that I couldn't shake off no matter how hard I tried. Some days, I'd walk into my apartment and feel like I couldn't breathe. The piles of things everywhere, from clothes to papers, kitchen utensils to boxes, were swallowing me whole. Every shelf, every table, every corner had something on it, and the mess felt relentless. I remember once tripping over a stack of books I'd left in the hallway, falling flat on my face. As I lay there on the floor, staring at the ceiling, I wondered how I'd let my life get so tangled up in stuff. I couldn't find anything I needed. Simple tasks took twice as long, and I'd often leave the house flustered and upset, convinced I'd forgotten something crucial. I can't count the number of times I'd be running out the door, late for work, only to realize I couldn't find my keys because they were buried somewhere under the clutter. My kitchen was filled with duplicate utensils, spices I forgot I had, and gadgets I'd used maybe once. I'd spend ages trying to cook a meal, frustrated that I couldn't find a clean space to chop vegetables, let alone sit down and enjoy my food. Cooking, once something I loved, became another source of stress in a life that was already teetering on the edge. The worst part, though, was how it affected my relationships. Friends would invite me over to their beautiful, serene homes, but I could never return the favor. I was too embarrassed to let anyone see the mess. When they'd ask to come by, I'd make excuses, anything to avoid exposing the chaos that had taken over my life. Over time, I noticed that my friendships were starting to suffer. I missed out on so many memories, so many laughs and heartfelt conversations, because I couldn't bring myself to let people in, both literally and emotionally. And it wasn't just friends. My family worried about me, too. They saw how withdrawn and stressed I'd become, but I couldn't bear to admit how deep the problem had gotten. I told myself it was just a little clutter, but deep down, I knew it was so much more than that. Clutter was taking over not only my space but my mind. I'd lie awake at night, surrounded by the dark silhouettes of piled-up belongings, feeling like I was suffocating. I'd look over at my nightstand, which was stacked with books I hadn't touched in years, receipts I'd forgotten to throw away, and trinkets I had no emotional attachment to but somehow couldn't let go of. I'd try to close my eyes, but the guilt, the constant gnawing feeling that I was drowning in my own life, wouldn't let me rest. Sometimes, I'd burst into tears for no reason, overwhelmed by a sadness I couldn't explain to anyone. The weight of my clutter was pressing down on me, squeezing every bit of joy and peace out of my life. The turning point came on a day that seemed ordinary, but it changed everything. I was late to a doctor's appointment, again, because I couldn't find my insurance card. Frantically searching, I opened drawer after drawer, scattering papers and other belongings all over the floor. As I did, I could feel the panic rising in my chest, my heart pounding as I realized I was losing control. After 20 minutes of searching, I found the card wedged between an expired coupon and a broken keychain. But by then, I'd missed my appointment. I sank down on the floor, surrounded by the mess I'd created, and I broke down. Sitting there on the cold, cluttered floor, I felt like I'd hit rock bottom. I was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. The clutter, the disorganization, the constant stress had drained me of every ounce of energy and joy. It was as if I'd been walking around in a fog, weighed down by things that no longer served me, and I couldn't see a way out. All I wanted was to feel calm, to feel in control, to feel like I could breathe in my own space. But at that moment, it felt like an impossible dream. In the days that followed, I could hardly function. Every time I looked around my apartment, the mess seemed bigger, more monstrous. The drawers that wouldn't close, the closets overflowing with clothes I hadn't worn in years, the piles of stuff that seemed to mock me every time I walked by. I'd try to clean up, but the process was overwhelming. I'd start in one corner, determined to make a change, only to give up after an hour, feeling defeated and hopeless. My life had become a cycle of stress, clutter, and anxiety, with no end in sight. I felt like I was living in a prison of my own making, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. The clutter was more than just stuff, it was a symbol of everything I was holding on to that was weighing me down, the things I couldn't let go of even when they were doing more harm than good. It was as if every item had a piece of my past, my fears, my regrets, and every time I tried to declutter, I had to face those emotions head on. It was painful, agonizing even, to let go of things that once brought me comfort, but now only reminded me of a life I didn't want to live anymore. And so, I stayed trapped, my space filled with things, and my heart filled with emptiness. The days blurred together, each one weighed down by the mess and chaos I couldn't escape. I was exhausted from constantly living in a cluttered environment, exhausted from the guilt and shame, exhausted from feeling like I'd lost control of my own life. There were moments when I wondered if I'd ever find peace, if I'd ever be able to reclaim my space, my mind, and my sanity. The clutter had taken so much from me, and I didn't know if I'd ever get it back. This is the story of a person who didn't just struggle with clutter, I was consumed by it. My journey wasn't easy, and the road to reclaiming my space, my peace, and my sanity was filled with tears, heartache, and self-discovery. But this is where it all began, lost in a sea of things, desperately searching for a way out. Sitting there, surrounded by the mess I'd created in my search for that one card, I realized I needed help. The clutter had taken over my life, and if I didn't make a change, I'd lose myself to it. It was time to take action, to break the cycle of stress and overwhelm, and start building a space where I could actually feel at peace. This wasn't going to be easy. I didn't know exactly how to declutter my life in a way that felt manageable, but I knew that it had to start with something simple, something I could handle. So, I took a deep breath and decided to try. The first steps I took were painfully small. I remember starting with one kitchen drawer. I emptied it out completely, looking at every item and asking myself why I was holding on to it. The high CPA phrase minimalist lifestyle had caught my attention in some articles I'd read, and while I didn't think I was ready to live like a monk, I knew that this approach could work for me, little by little. In that drawer, I found 3 vegetable peelers, 2 of which I hadn't touched in years. I kept one, tossed the others, and moved on. That first small victory felt monumental, and it gave me a bit of hope. From there, I tackled one small area each day. I'd heard that organized home was a goal many people aimed for, but it was only now that I began to understand what that meant for my own life. I started making rules for myself. If I hadn't used something in the last year, I let it go. This simple rule helped me see how much of my stuff was just, well, stuff. As I sorted through my things, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I hadn't expected decluttering to feel this freeing. Of course, there were setbacks. Some days, I'd look around and feel like the clutter was never ending. I'd get halfway through a pile and start feeling that familiar overwhelm creeping in. But I'd remind myself that I didn't have to do it all at once. I could take my time. I learned about the one in, one out rule, a common phrase in organization, and adopted it wholeheartedly. If I bought something new, I had to let go of something old. This not only helped me keep my home from accumulating more clutter but also made me more mindful of what I chose to bring into my life. One of the biggest changes came when I discovered digital solutions for managing my documents. I'd kept paper copies of everything, thinking it was safer to have physical backups, but the digital world had transformed. Using document scanning apps allowed me to clear out drawer after drawer of papers, receipts, and even sentimental letters, all while saving everything important in secure cloud storage. With fewer physical reminders piling up, I felt more in control of my space and my life. I also reached out to a friend who had successfully adopted a clutter-free home mindset. She recommended setting up zones within my apartment for each activity, ensuring everything had a specific place. The idea of a home organization system seemed like an intimidating concept, but she explained it in a way that made sense. My kitchen became a place for cooking, my bedroom a space for sleeping, and my desk a designated work area. Slowly, I noticed that creating zones reduced the chance of clutter accumulating because I always knew where things belonged. Once I saw how this system started to work, I expanded it to other areas. My wardrobe had long been a mess of clothes I hadn't worn in years, and capsule wardrobe was a term I'd heard thrown around, though I didn't fully understand it until I decided to try it myself. I sorted through my clothes, keeping only the pieces I loved and wore frequently, and I donated the rest. The result was a clean, simplified closet that made getting dressed every morning so much easier. No more frantic searches, no more feeling like I had nothing to wear despite having so much. For the first time in years, I felt like my home reflected the life I wanted to live. But my journey didn't stop at decluttering physical items. I realized that mental clutter was just as detrimental to my peace. I began practicing mindfulness techniques to help manage the anxiety I'd associated with my space. Taking just a few minutes each day to breathe and focus helped clear my mind and put things into perspective. This new habit reduced my stress and made it easier to let go of things without guilt or regret. Through this process, I also came to appreciate how much emotional weight was tied to certain items. I'd held on to things that reminded me of past relationships, souvenirs from trips I no longer cared about, and gifts from people I didn't see anymore. Each one carried memories that kept me emotionally tied to times I didn't need to dwell on. By letting go of these items, I allowed myself to move forward emotionally as well as physically. I'd read about the sentimental clutter concept before, but living through it was a revelation. Each item I released brought me a step closer to clarity, and I started to notice how much more energy I had to focus on things that truly mattered to me. One of the most transformative tools I found during this journey was a simple organization app that helped me set daily goals and track my progress. Having a digital list that I could check off each day motivated me to stay consistent, even when the going got tough. Productivity apps became a lifeline, not only in my decluttering journey but in keeping my mind free from the constant clutter of unfinished tasks and forgotten chores. As my space became more organized, I started to feel a profound shift. I was no longer spending my days stressed and frustrated by my surroundings. I had more energy, more clarity, and a renewed sense of calm. It was like finally coming up for air after being submerged for far too long. My relationships improved, too. I no longer avoided inviting friends over, and I reconnected with family without feeling like I had something to hide. The simple act of letting go had given me back my life in ways I hadn't thought possible. Reflecting on my journey now, I see that tackling the clutter was about much more than just cleaning up my home. It was about reclaiming control, finding peace, and living intentionally. Every small step I took led to a sense of accomplishment that motivated me to keep going. For anyone facing a similar struggle, I can't emphasize enough how much a clean and organized space can transform your life. In the final stretch of my transformation, I discovered something that would guide me to a complete and lasting change, a book titled Declutter Your Life, Simplify Your Space and Reclaim Your Sanity. This book didn't just provide tips, it offered a comprehensive guide that spoke directly to the struggles I'd faced, helping me see that I wasn't alone in my journey. Its structured steps on everything from starting small to handling sentimental items provided the roadmap I needed. The insights on mental clutter were especially helpful, helping me create a clutter-free home and a clutter-free mind. If you're ready to start your own journey to a simpler, more peaceful life, I highly recommend grabbing a copy of Declutter Your Life, Simplify Your Space and Reclaim Your Sanity. It's more than a book, it's a pathway to reclaiming control over your life and finally finding the peace that may feel out of reach right now. You can get a digital copy of it at